Sebastian Grote. Most of you will know Sebastian. Editor of You Name It.
Editor of You Name It. Editor of Prime Creative Media, Prime Creative Media's commercial transport stable, which includes titles like Prime Mover, Diesel, Travel Magazine, Global Travel Magazine. So thanks, Peter, for squeezing me into this group of much smarter people. It makes me look really good. I'm supposed to chair the session and ask you a few questions, but Robert and Peter also asked me to share a few of, I guess, my experiences as a journalist with data and data availability in the industry. And I'd like to keep it short because it's quite frustrating and we don't want to move down. But look, in my time doing this, especially our global magazine, I've learned that data has become increasingly important to decide if a business in the transport or logistics field is successful or not long term. Now, on top of that, as you hear, I'm German, so I pretty much base every life decision on data. So it can be quite frustrating if you're a journalist these days and you do not have access to reliable information. Now, I always ask myself the question I just actually asked Kelly the same. I do have a feeling that at some stages, and this is not only restricted to Australia, multi-million-dollar businesses make decisions effectively on educated guesses. Now, for a journalist, that's especially hard because I have a public duty to base my writing on correct information. Now, about once a week, I get a call from someone in the world asking me to give them a rundown of the Australian trailer or truck market. It's usually an international magazine or a government agency. And all they want to know is who's doing the zoo, what are the 4 or 5 key figures. And I usually have 2 choices. I can either admit that there's not really an information source that I can access to give them all they need to know. There's obviously a few separate ones, but not one accepted source. Or I can just make it up. So that's what I usually do. Which I know is some sort of professional issue, especially when you're from where I'm from. Now, reverting to guesswork is obviously not the best way to go about it, and it brings me to the fact that I want to say that what ARTSA is trying to achieve here can really make a difference to what I'm trying to do, but also I think what everyone else is trying to do in this industry. Because how can we survive in the age of big data that everyone is talking about if there are no data standards, if there's no clear information? How can we have a performance-based approach to trailer building if we don't even really know how many trailers there are, right? So I told you it's getting a bit depressing at times. Other questions I hear are, how professional can an industry be where there's no reliable information on market size apart from educated estimates? And how do finance companies and insurance companies work around all this if there's no real database? So hopefully you can answer me all these questions and we come to a solution today. But now, to begin with, maybe, actually, Peter, you should actually be here too. I think Andrew. When you started this project 4 years ago, what were the 2 or 3 key questions that people wanted you to answer, and have you answered them?
Well, key question is what's the size of the Australian market? Different segments. And that's, I think we're at the point of answering that quite well. We've been, because the data that we started with was had many foibles or was potentially unreliable, we had to be very careful. And we now think that we've got an accurate picture from the data. So I think we're on the point of being reliable, answering that. We're not the only source in the marketplace. There is tick data that's clearly reliable as well. But we filled in a lot of gaps because we've been able to quantify the number of new vehicles in each registration category. I think that hasn't been available before.
So Les, you run a world famous scheme that's effectively based all around numbers and data. So are you happy with this now?
Excuse me. Yeah, I think it's, I guess, as I tried to explain, that we might have a special situation because the PBS operation is really controlled by, at this point in time, or managed, probably that's a better word, with the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator. So we have access to significant amount of data. But as I said, I was really surprised, and thanks to ARTSA now that we have a capability of looking at new registrations, especially new registrations for categories where we can see what the trends are. So it's I guess it's not just good for it's good for developing better policy decisions in terms of what's important, what's not. But also we can use that information for education, for marketing the scheme, and addressing, for instance, those manufacturers who might not be part of it at this point in time, providing them information, because yes, in most cases the market is very strong and market forces are driving certain decisions, but it's always beneficial if regulatory bodies would assist those decisions which are made.
Melissa, I think you might be able to relate a little bit to my predicament with the data situation given the project that you just worked through. So I just looked at your report, but it was 190 pages, so I didn't really get to read it that quick. But talk us through a bit. How did you go about it? Because at the end of the day, you must have looked at the market, and there was just the data chaos that you then had to bring together. How did you go about it?
Thank you. Yeah, I think, look, the fact that it is a 190-page report shows that there is actually a lot of data out there. It's just a matter of finding it and pulling it together. And I think one of the main challenges that I've found along the way is relationship building and relationship management. So I think a lot of the time, once you do identify that there is a data set out there or some information that you would like to get, it's building the trust with the person that has developed that piece of information or is holding a data set that you might require to feed into your work. And that takes time, I think, and building that trust is what will get you through some of the privacy concerns, because a lot of the time I find there's nothing in a legal sense that's holding up the sharing of the information. It's more a reluctance or, not an unwillingness, just a bit of a fear of sharing something that someone feels that they shouldn't share. And a lot of the time working through those issues with a stakeholder, as I said, takes some time, but at the end of the day, they're quite happy to share the information if they know what it's being used for. They can see that in the case it needs to be de-identified or aggregated, that's being done. And they're seeing that the purpose is actually a good one, and it's going to serve it's going to improve a situation that needs improving.
The Monash team must be excited about this, because what I took away from that presentation was that there was a lot of frustration around actually making data available, right? Are you working together with universities? Is this all shared? Will this change the game?
We are working with universities. I've definitely spoken to Monash, Melbourne as well, a lot of University of Queensland. So we're working with whoever we can speak to, really, to try and get as much information as we can, and really, as I said, enhance the value of the individual pieces of information by bringing them together. And I think the more that we start to do these types of projects, the more benefit that people see from them, and the more willing they are to share that information. So, as I said earlier in my presentation, we've started working with Customs, Australian Border Force, as they're now known, the Customs part of that department, who, by doing this report, we've been able to say, look, we know a lot more about the rail side of things. We can see that iron ore is a huge industry in Australia. We can see how much it contributes to the economy. We can see that 3 rail lines and 3 companies really service that market largely. So if something happens there, we're in a bit of trouble, you know. But when it comes to road freight, we know a lot less. We know high-level commodity movements, but without sort of being able to understand in the same way that we can for rail where the pressure points are, it's a lot harder to do something about it. So we're able to sell it to them in that way and say this is what that information is going to help us do.
So, David, a lot of people have referenced BITRE data today. Was there anything that you've heard where you thought that might not be just true, or we need to work together on this, or did you get anything out of the other, I guess, little data islands that we've uncovered today on the map, where you think we can build on that?
Oh, certainly. I think the work that ARTSA is doing, putting together the truck registration data, is very useful. And it would even have application for some of our forecasting work because we're reliant on data from products such as the survey motor vehicle use or the freight movement survey, which have a frequency of 2 years in the case of the survey motor vehicle use, and as I said this morning, much less frequent for a freight movement survey. So that would give you more frequent snapshots and the ability to track what's happening closer to the time, whereas we're building off data that is now 2 years old. It's old as, well, it's actually worse than that because by the time the ABS has been able to process the survey results, it's generally 12 months after the end of the survey has been undertaken. So often the data is 12 months old when you first get it, and then ages to 3 years old before you get the next survey motor vehicle use. So I suppose I really sort of echo what other people have said. It's partly pooling sort of different sources of data together can enrich each of the individual sources. And certainly I sort of want to echo what I said this morning. There's other sources of data that we may be able to harness, such as GPS type data or technically, I suppose, electronic administrative data that companies hold, which may enable you to undertake collections that we do today, but more efficiently and effectively, with a lower sort of burden on survey respondents that we place on them today.
Yeah. So what you're really trying to say is it's incredibly frustrating that this is not already all in one place and working together.
Yeah, where I sit, it is incredibly frustrating. But there's reasons for that. But in the road space, it's because the task is so sort of diverse and carried out by so many players that traditionally we've been reliant on sample survey instruments to do it. So you can only survey, whatever it is, 16,000 vehicles, and it does place a pretty high burden on the respondents. And in other sectors, sort of rail, sea, and air, it's much easier to get a full population total because there's only a handful of operators in those spaces, but then you run hard up against confidentiality constraints. So while you can say, infer something about iron ore and coal, there's a whole lot of rail activity that's happening between capital cities, which we don't have a lot of visibility about because the companies involved will tell you total, but don't actually want to give you any sort of commodity level information. It's highly sensitive to them.
Yeah. So it might be helpful for your blood pressure number tracker. Now you said that the data, some of the data you're using is roughly 2 years old now, whereas Andrew's data is about a quarter old. Can you talk us a bit through the process, because you've been the person that has been tasked with dissecting the initial data and I guess how hard it was to actually come to a conclusion and a few of maybe the obstacles along the way?
Yeah, sure. I think ARTSA has come at this from an interesting place that we're going through a route that is traditionally not done, and we're going through the Netflix data. So we've kind of had these touchstones along the way, and we can look at the ABS data or we can see tick data, but it's always quite difficult to directly compare. And I think probably the biggest challenge that we have is cleaning the data and making sure that it's good, but also the fact that everyone operates from a different starting point and is coming to different conclusions about different questions, which I think makes it hard to directly compare to. It's hard for us to directly compare to the TIC data or the work with BITRE and come to the same conclusion. So I think that's probably going to be a big challenge going forward as well, and probably that collaboration with the people on this stage and people in the audience is going to be the big next step for ARTSA, I think, of how we progress this forward.
I was about to ask, how many times have the NTC and BITRE and ARTSA and probably even TIC sat around the same table and compared their information?
We've certainly been working really closely together over the last 12 months on not only this project, but just in general, really around information sharing. I think David's project that he's doing is also part of it's a subset of the Prime Minister and Cabinet project that's going on around open data and access to open data across the federal government generally. So there's been some guidelines released within the last 2 months, which are for federal government agencies being able to analyse when they're able to share information or open data amongst all of the agencies and with the public, because a lot of the time we don't know what the value of the data sets that we hold is until we release them. There's people like app developers that come along and say, hey, I can create this wonderful app and tell you what the easiest way to get from A to B is if you can provide me with information X. So I think certainly we're working together at that broader scale and definitely on the projects that we're working on as well.
Well, let's pass it on to Monash straight away, because is that enough? Is that what we need, or is there more from, I guess, the work that you guys have done, especially in the field of excellent research, where you think that now we need to get to this certain stage and we need to break down these barriers? What else can be done to facilitate that process? Less paperwork.
Just to make my job easier, like you talk to someone who's talking about things, I'm getting 14 digits. Sometimes we have had projects where it would be useful to be able to track vehicles, and so that would be something that would help. You're talking about like this, and conformity between states, how they record things. Yet even with registration data, we do the body type, I think we like to know. We look at all that body type stuff and registration data, but we do it from the state registration databases and communities. So conformity within the states would be really nice. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. We're at least getting there, so we're blaming the federal system.
Heavy vehicles in particular, I pointed out some of the difficulties in identifying the different types in crash data.
So, Peter, what's the next logical step? Is it to meet on neutral ground and pull all the data together and then lock Andrew in a room for 3 months?
No, I don't think that. It's, no, I think this conference promotes collaboration. So you people now know what we've got and you've got. And that provides, and we know we've met each other, and so hopefully we will collaborate, as we do with this gentleman here in the blue. Long-term supporter of ARTSA, and we've had lots of collaboration, which has been useful for both of us. So I hope that we can do the same. I think I see our project in the future. We will be trying to quantify the freight carrying capacity of the fleet. It's the next logical step. We need to work out deal with the body type. It's important. Well, we do know how many axles the vehicle's got. We know what sort of vehicle it is. So we should be able to classify it in a way that describes the freight carrying capacity of the vehicle and therefore the database. And that might help us as a community match the forecasts and the capacity of the fleet. Can I ask a question, David? I'm interested in this freight task prediction. And of course, any sort of prediction is, based on assumptions and whatever. Does the prediction have upper and lower bounds And if so, how do those bounds relate to the published economic growth rate of the country?
Yes, the prediction would have upper and lower bounds. I don't know what, I can't recall the exact sort of size of those bounds. I mean, those upper and lower bounds are really coming out of the sort of the underlying model that was used to generate them. Occasionally we'll also put in, we might make allowance for the rate, some sort of reasonable range of variation in the sort of GDP forecast for the economy. But I can't recall off the top of my head what sort of those ranges are, for the confidence interval.
Because I think the industry at present would probably say that the freight task is not growing at all. And yet we've got 2.5% growth. So it's also about understanding the nature of that economic growth, because the mining goes down and the freight goes down.
Yeah, that's right. I suppose. Yeah, certainly the rail forecasts are really hostage to what happens in iron ore, principally, and to a lesser extent coal. The roadside forecasts, more general economic activity, and I suppose since the GFC, it's not quite clear how. But looking at the sort of the two snapshots we've got, as I said this morning, from the Freight Movement Survey, which is really the only snapshots we've got of the sort of regional distribution of freight around the country. It's showing that sort of where we thought we'd have growth in some of the intercapital markets, 15 years ago when the last survey was undertaken, have not grown much at all, whereas freight in capital cities or urban areas has grown a bit more. So we're starved for sort of that more detailed information about what's going on, but anecdotally it could be partly related to this issue of declining manufacturing in some sectors, meaning that we've got more import substitution. So the task is less domestic movements of intermediate or semi-finished goods, and more direct movement to port and then distribution from port out to nearby hinterland. I'm not fully armed to be able to fully answer that question here today.
Well, it's pretty challenging, isn't it? Review it.
Thanks. Rob Perkins here from ARTSA. The data we've been dealing with today is all steeped in history. It's yesterday. The question on all our minds, I think, is the future, and therefore how can we use the data that we have now to predict the future? We've made some rudimentary attempts at forecasting using the ARTSA data, and we immediately pulled back because we realised we didn't know what we were doing. We don't have any tools for predicting the future. We're a supplier group, and I think a lot of the people in this room are involved in that supplier economy. They make things, they sell things, and therefore they are interested in where the economy is going. They want to know what the linkages are between the economy and the marketplace. History is a bit of a teacher. It does inform you a little bit as to where the future might go, but at the moment, and I can recall that famous doubling of the freight car task, and I did spend some time, at least a decade ago, looking at where the origin of that particular statement came from. It seemed to be coupled to GDP plus 1%, or was it 0.5%, something of that nature, buried in a BITRE document somewhere from about 1999, I think. So if that's the basis of our forecasting, we've got a bit of a problem. And it's not very sophisticated. So I think the challenge for all of us is that the data, the ARTSA data that I look at now, tells us that our growth is slowing. In some cases it's negative, in some cases it's positive, and it's very sectoral. And we can only go so far with our data, but if it's useful for other people in helping them improve and refine their forecasts, then I think we're doing a valuable thing. So I'm just interested, David, in your views on forecasting and how we can all get better at that.
more data is generally better than less for forecasting the future. In terms of those old BITRE forecasts that you're talking about, doubling of the freight task, certainly, that did hold true back up until sort of really through the mid-90s and the early 2000s. And it was driven, we had average rates of domestic GDP growth of 3 to 3.5% per annum. On top of that, we also had freight rates, or essentially road transport costs that were falling a hell of a lot through that period, partly driven by improvements in vehicle productivity, but other factors as well. So that 3% plus a bit was because of declining freight rates as well. So not only the relationship between, sort of historical relationship between freight growth and GDP growth, but also freight rates. I come forward to today, and it's fair to say that the impact of the GFC is still also, I suppose, yet to become quite clear in terms of the freight target. It certainly appears from the small amount of data we had. We've only got two years snapshots from the survey of motor vehicle use, that road freight activity in this country took a bit of a hit during that period. Now, whether that was just the start of a bit more of a plateauing, or whether it's a hit and it's a return, I think we probably need one more SMBU to really be sure of that. And that's where potentially the ARTSA data, in terms of the size of the fleet, gives us a bit more information about how that's tracked through that period. We're still projecting that sort of 80% growth in the total freight task, and also simply for the road freight task over a 20-year horizon, principally off the back of expected GDP growth. We're not anticipating any real change anymore in freight rates. We're assuming freight rates in real terms don't go up, don't go down too much. So I can't necessarily allay your concerns about how much detail we're applying to the science there, because we are a bit starved of data in this space.
There have been some big external shocks. The emissions rules, the changes to emissions rules, for example, drove an incredible spike in the purchasing of equipment to get the pre-emission gear. And so those sort of external policy decisions, if you like, can have a major impact on who buys what when. And we're now observing, Peter, fill us in, the Obama fuel rules in the States and what impact that might have in coming future in terms of purchasing equipment.
The United States EPA has introduced fuel efficiency requirements, improvement requirements for heavy vehicles. And this is, as Rob says, an Obama initiative. I think it was the trade-off for the Obama administration bailing out the US car industry, but it's flowed onto the heavy vehicle space. And it is driving a lot of innovation in US truck and trailer design, engine design as well. It's not just about engines, it's also about aerodynamics and low-loss tyres, a whole lot of stuff. Heat capture, and I think just recently the 2020 goals have been announced, and they will drive further innovation in that market for the next, until 2020. And we will experience that in Australia, because the application of electronics on diesel engines is traceable back to the Californian legislature requiring black smoke rules bringing in black smoke rules in the mid-90s, I think it was. And or early 90s, and that was a win-win for everybody. So we're now looking at the Obama developments as being a win-win for this industry, because it will force some innovation which hopefully will make our trucks and trailers more efficient.
Any questions from the floor now that we've got the country's number of people together on stage?
Melissa, the 1.8 million tonne kilometres per articulated vehicle, that one jumped out at me in your presentation. That's quite a fundamental number, I think. Where did it come from?
It's quite a large number. It comes, I believe, from the Survey of Motor Vehicle Use and the Freight Movement Survey. As I said, there's a lot of data sources in that report, so it's often hard to remember where things come from. But that one, I think, is from those two. So yes, it is a big number, and I think equally as interesting is the light commercials and what they're carrying around at the same time. And I think, you know, I would also add that forecasting, it becomes even more difficult when you factor in things like the pace of technological development and, you know, things like automation of vehicles. You know, we really don't know what the task is going to look like in 20, 50 years' time at the moment. We've seen, you know, how, 15 years ago the smartphone wasn't around, and the pace of change that's happened in the communications industry since that's come into play. So I think we're going to start to see things happen that we probably are going to find a lot harder to predict and a lot harder to respond to as well. So I think that adds to the forecasting difficulty that we already have.
Yes, because a quick back of the envelope calculation, a multi-combination prime mover is capable of pulling 70 tonnes. And if 30 or 40, let's say 40 tonnes of payload, and a truck reasonably will go half a million kilometres a year, then you've got at least 10 times that capacity for every new multi-combination. So
Yeah,
1.8, I'm sure it's right, but it sounds pretty low compared to the capacity.
What would be, yeah, that's right. And I get, you know, it's an average and it's based on the respondents to the survey, so there's limitations to the data like there is with any data, but I guess this kind of project is what pulls out issues like that, and you can, by doing this sort of thing, you can start to look at what the issues are at a strategic level. I think that's the beauty of what all of us here are trying to achieve at the moment, really.
So I'll just chime in on that last one. So the average load across all those, across the whole fleet for articulated trucks is about 22 tonnes per kilometre travelled. So that's sort of your average you're looking at. So that's a combination of your larger and your smaller size and all the empty running that they.
Can you give us an indication less of where that could be headed down the track in terms of average loads?
It's interesting because when we are dealing with road managers, for instance, road damage is normally calculated on a significantly higher axle loads, and the protection of the network is normally supported by those arguments. So it's very interesting to look at that. I guess one area wasn't really mentioned here, and that's the importance of reliable data for safety, health vehicle safety, and driving policy developments in terms of the health vehicle area. And this is why it's absolutely critical to have reliable access to reliable information, because a part of your multi-million-dollar company, some of us here are charged with developing public policies which would influence not just those companies but the life of everyone in this country. So I guess it's very, very important. One more comment, and then I finish, that it's in terms of getting reliable information, it's not just difficulties to find the right resources or right sources of information, but also that somehow we should be doing that on some sort of coordinated way, because when we are doing surveys and then you contact a company and they pick up the phone and they say, you are the sixth person asking me this information, go away. So I guess for us that's another challenge, that in terms of doing this work, we should be coordinating our activities, because that would make it easier in the long run.
Sounds like a date.
Surely it's the role of government to get above that. I mean, the tax department knows everybody's tax file number. They know what people do and how much they do and how much they make. And they don't disclose that to anybody and compromise people's privacy or whatever. Surely it's the role of the government to get above the inter-company politics to get the real data. So that if you're a one-person government, i.e. a dictator, you want to know how big your transport fleet is. In the case of national disaster or heaven forbid a war, you need to know what your freight capability is to support the citizens that you hope will continue to have you as a dictator.
Will ARTSA will take that on as a challenge.
I think maybe I have a bit of a go at answering, not answering the question directly, but Melissa mentioned before there's a whole of government project looking at trying to make data essentially make better use of data within government. So for those sitting outside government, you might not understand how hard it is to actually share data across different organisations within government, even though we're all sort of one government. Just speaking from the federal government now, even though we're all one government, Melissa mentioned the case of going to Immigration and Border Protection to try and access the customs data, and our organisation, has separately been approaching them as well, because their data has information about where containers move from the port to the first sort of postcode of distribution, information that would be very valuable to help inform infrastructure investment decisions around our cities. But it's incredibly hard building the trust to get access to their data. They've got legislation in place which says, or their officers interpret as, they could go to jail if they disclose this information and it somehow gets into the public domain. So I think part of this whole of government project is to build those bridges to make data sharing within government a bit easier, but still protect the privacy and confidentiality of those organisations and individuals who provide data to government. So it's a bit of a work in progress. And I think maybe finally I might say, no, we don't necessarily have all of that data that would enable us to know everything government might need to know in the time of the national crisis. Yeah.
It's actually been, they actually tried to do it, but it's been the guys from the census. So it didn't end up working out. No.
Can I raise another question? We have a greenhouse gas problem, and we've committed to reducing our emissions significantly by 2020. I'm yet to see in our industry any coordinated approach to even figuring out what this really means. I'm not saying it's all government's responsibility. The industry has to take some responsibility as well. So I'd like to have a discussion about what we, the industry, should be doing to at least quantify the greenhouse emissions that we've got in our industry. And we might find that provides a great justification for liberalising some of our length and width regulations.
I think I certainly don't have the answers about what industry could do to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. I wish I did. However, in terms of actually understanding what they contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, I think I mentioned before the Department of Environment puts out a report annually around what different industries contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, and they've been able to use some of the information both in the BITRE and our report that we shared with them before the release in this year's report. So I think that comes out in about 4 weeks' time. and again, it's that first step of having the information available about what the contributions are, to then look at the next step around how you can actually reduce that. So I mean, that doesn't give you a solution necessarily, but it's a starting point.
Well, it occurs to me that ARTSA could use its database, its new vehicle database, to predict what the greenhouse emissions from the fleet would be. If you can marry that database to the actual freight task.
And I think we've traditionally used the data from the survey of motor vehicle use, and it gives you estimates for total travel and total fuel use in the fleet. So, transport, including passenger transport, I think contributes about 14% to Australia's greenhouse emissions. And I can't remember what the freight component of that is, but must be around 4 or 5%. I guess.
We could, knowing what the various vehicle configurations are in the fleet, and knowing how old the vehicles are, some common sense rules, we could actually estimate what different configurations were contributing.
Peter, I understand. I might be a little out of touch with this, I'm not sure, but I think Linfox has done a huge amount of reducing their carbon footprint and measured it before and after. So there's a private industry, private family-owned company model that extrapolated where they started and where they finished and applied it to the country to have an idea of what could be achieved without the government.
And is that in the public domain?
I doubt it. Oh, sorry, the total numbers are, whether how they did it. You have to ask them, I've no idea.
I think our time is running out.
Yes. Well, any more questions? Simon.
Simon Humphrey, Simon Suzu. No one from the ABS is here to defend themselves, but Alyssa, I think you mentioned the motor vehicle census, and I've used some of the data in those motor vehicle censi. I'm concerned about the reliability of that data, given that I think it's a telephone survey or sent out to a few fleets. What's your thoughts on that, and is there a way we could do it better?
I actually think David's probably better to answer this one because he works more closely with the ABS. However, my experience is that, you know, as David mentioned before, some data is better than no data at all. So yes, we've acknowledged the limitations of the SMVU, but we have used it legally throughout the report because it's the best available that's out there. So, but in terms of the actual limitations, I might let you comment on that if you want to.
What concerns did you have exactly?
Well, whenever you're asking a fleet operator about their fuel economy or their distances travelled, I'm not sure you're necessarily getting the real figures. I know they might be a bit optimistic. And also, it seems that they take a fairly small sample size.
So taking the last bit first, the sample size here, we're talking about the survey of motor vehicle use, the one that provides your estimates, not the motor vehicle census. Yeah, so their sample size is about 16,000 vehicles across Australia, of which I think 8,000 odd are freight vehicles. But that includes LCVs as well. I think, if you read the explanatory notes, they say in every survey that the question about fuel consumption rate is the, how do I put this, the least well answered question in the survey, or in their language, probably requires the highest rate of imputation, meaning they just either didn't get a response or they got some poor responses. I have been privy to having a look at some of the confidentialised unit record data in the survey motor vehicle use. This is some time ago, and it was only looking at the passenger car data, not focusing on the truck data in particular. Certainly, in having a look at that data, yes, the fuel fuel consumption rate response was the sort of the most poorly answered question you got for old Perkins. You know, people answered either 10 or 20 or 5 and nothing in between. So you can sort of see that, and it came out with an average of about 12 litres per 100 kilometres, which is about right. So go figure. So to end on a bit more of a hopeful note, I think the survey of motor vehicle uses and its methodology is, well, hopefully here to stay, because it's the only sort of regular measure of transport activity we've got in this country. And in fact, we're one of the few countries that has such a regular survey of transport and such a comprehensive survey of transport activity. So I don't want to throw it out because of problems with that, with answers on a few questions. But I think if we can tap some of these electronic sort of sources of data, so on the GPS data, if you could start to marry it with, say, some engine telemetry data, which reported the actual fuel consumption rate in vehicles, or the alternative is the ABS has been looking at some alternative ways of doing the the survey of motor vehicle use. So in Canada, I think they discarded what was their equivalent survey for a few years, and then introduced an OBD2 sort of plug-in device, and sent that to survey respondents, so both passenger car owners and truck owners. So you just plug that into your OBD port and for a period of time, and send that unit back, and they download the records. And I think in return you also got a report of how you performed relative to your near cohort. So I think you're nodding your head. I think more of that electronic data is the way of the future. It's about building, we touched on this previously, it's about building trust with the respondents or industry or whoever it may be. You have to build trust with to access that sort of information and make full use of it.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. There obviously is a better way, but it takes a huge effort to gather that and depersonalise it and everything else.
I couldn't resist. We collect information generally because there's some kind of economic imperative. We collect registration data because someone wants the registration dollars. And the taxation department collects data because they want their taxes, and on we go. And if you don't have an economic imperative to collect data, you simply won't. And we regularly get questions of people who say, look, why aren't you collecting, someone collecting data on origin and destination and so on? And the answer is because there's no economic imperative. There's no one driving it. There's no compulsion to do it. And so the big future for the planet, I suppose, is this telemetry type of data. And what that will unlock in terms of the ability to run a pay-go system, for example, for access to roads and so on. So that opportunity is real and here and now. And what we now know is pretty much every company or any transport company, if they're in the room, has lots of telemetry data, enormous amount of telemetry data now on everything from fatigue and where they go and so on. Braking incidents, for example, interventions of their braking system. They're awash with data. There's no compulsion to share it. There's no compulsion for them to even use it. So quite often there has to be a bit of a stick in here or a carrot in order to draw that out. So we're no longer short of data. We've actually got too much. We just don't know where it is or how to analyse it.
I just wanted to say something about telemetric data. We had a project on the Geelong Road with a truck company it was to do with the lower speed limits on the Geelong Road. And the telemetric data was collected by a truck company and it was obviously collected before it was given to us. So even that may not be reliable.
Economic imperative.
Well, it's that time. Thank you very much to the panel. We appreciate your input to our day, and we hope to talk with you in the future in a collaborative way.